And very timely question. What are the prospects for our human future in space? Since 1961, we've had 50 years of spacefaring, but with the end of the space shuttle era, American human spaceflight is currently on hiatus. However, NASA has had spectacular success with robotic missions from the Mars rover to the Hubble Space Telescope to several deep space probes. And while NASA is ramping down now in this era of austerity, the commercial space industry is gearing up. As we've already heard today about the activities of SpaceX, very soon, in addition, with the emergence of commercial space lines like Virgin Galactic, getting into space will be very much like booking a very expensive plane ticket. So as you can see, there's a lot of innovation happening right now in the space arena, not only in the technology, but also in the business models and in the evolving models of government and the role of government agencies. So in light of these questions, we're very privileged to have our three very distinguished speakers here today to help us see where we are now and where we might be going in the future. Our first speaker today is Dr. George Nield. Dr. Nield has over 30 years of experience in the aerospace field with the U.S. Air Force, NASA, and in private industry. Dr. Nield is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and earned his MS and PhD degrees in aeronautics and astronautics from Stanford University. He also holds an MBA from George Washington University and is a graduate in flight test engineering from the U.S. Air Force's Test Pilot School. Since 2008, he has served as the Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation at the Federal Aviation Administration. Help me welcome Dr. George Nield.
Thank you, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. This year we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the beginning of human spaceflight. It was back on April 12, 1961, that the Soviet Union launched Yuri Gagarin into orbit, making him the first person to travel to space. Now, since that time, we've seen a lot of very significant accomplishments. The Apollo moon landings, the operation of the space shuttle, and the construction and operation of the International Space Station. But over that 50 years, almost all of those great accomplishments have been done by federal governments. In our case, by NASA, and by government agencies in the Soviet Union and Russia and in China. But going forward, it's going to be a lot different. We are beginning a very significant change in how we conduct our space programs, one in which private industry is going to play a very significant role, especially when we're talking about transportation to and from low Earth orbit and for suborbital missions. So this afternoon, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about commercial space transportation, how we got to where we are today, and what we're likely to see in the years ahead. Let's start by taking a look at the overall U.S. space program. There's really three different sectors involved. The civil sector, led by NASA, and that has included operation of the space shuttle, the space station, and the programs that NASA is initiating to explore the solar system. The military sector is led by the Air Force, and it includes launch of defense communication satellites, GPS navigation system, and various sensors and other systems designed to support our national security efforts. The commercial sector is pretty much everything else, including the launch of telecommunication satellites, direct broadcast TV, Earth resources, and the recent interest in space tourism. Well, the commercial sector really got its start back in 1984, when President Reagan issued an executive order and Congress passed the Commercial Space Launch Act. And that set up the Office of Commercial Space Transportation at that time as a staff office reporting right to the Secretary of Transportation. In 1995, the office was moved over to the FAA, where today we're one of 4 lines of business, as we call them, along with aviation safety, airports, and the Air Traffic Organization. We have a twofold mission. First of all, to ensure public safety during commercial launch and reentry activities. And secondly, to encourage, facilitate, and promote commercial space transportation. One of the most important tools that we have to ensure safety is the requirement in the law that any U.S. citizen or entity that wants to conduct the launch of a launch vehicle anywhere in the world needs to have a license from our office. And the only exception to that requirement is for missions being conducted by and for the government. So NASA did not need a license for operating the space shuttle. The Air Force has not needed one for their military missions. But anyone else needs to work with us. Now, altogether, there's been 205 licensed launches over the years, and all of those have been conducted without any fatalities, serious injuries, or significant property damage to the uninvolved public. So we like that safety record, and we want to keep that intact going forward. We oversee a lot of different kinds of operations, ranging from launches from the ground, from the air, from the sea. We are responsible for both expendable launch vehicles and reusable launch vehicles. We handle both suborbital and orbital rockets. We also license the operation of launch sites, sometimes called spaceports. You see some of those on this map. They're identified in blue. There's 8 of them currently in the United States. One of the things that really caught people's attention and got folks talking about commercial space transportation was the Ansari X Prize. That was a $10 million prize that was offered for the first non-governmental team that could design, build, and operate a vehicle capable of carrying 3 people up to the edge of space, returning them to Earth, and then use that same vehicle to do that same mission again in 2 weeks or less to show the business feasibility of the vehicle. Now that got a lot of attention all around the world. There were actually 26 different teams from 7 different countries that registered for the prize. In the end, though, it was the team led by the famed aviation designer Burt Rutan, shown on the right, with a lot of the funding from Paul Allen, who was one of the co-founders of Microsoft. And their system involved a carrier aircraft called the White Knight and a spacecraft called Spaceship One. The overall launch system would take off from a runway, climb up to about 40,000 feet. They would release the spacecraft, light the rocket engine, and then zoom on up to the edge of space. And if you looked out the window, this is what you'd see. The spaceship then fell back down into the atmosphere and glided back for a runway landing. And because they were able to do that twice within 2 weeks, they won the $10 million prize. And as a result, we had 2 new astronauts, this time commercial astronauts, Mike Melville and Brian Binney, and they achieved that new recognition. And today, of course, Spaceship One is hanging just down the hall in the Milestones of Flight Gallery, in between the Spirit of St. Louis, flown by Charles Lindbergh across the Atlantic, also in pursuit of a prize, and the X-1, which first broke the sound barrier, with Chuck Yeager aboard. So that, I think, shows the significance of that accomplishment, because it was indeed a very special moment in our space history. More recently, in 2009, there were some other prizes out there for folks to compete for. One was called the Lunar Lander Challenge. And this prize, the objective was to build an unmanned vehicle that could take off, climb up 50 meters, translate 100 meters, and then land, refuel if necessary, and then fly back to the original location, all that within a 2.5-hour period. And we saw 2 very small entrepreneurial teams, one from Aspen Space Systems and one from Armadillo Aerospace, split $2 million in prizes for that competition. Going forward, our office is facing a couple of very significant challenges right now. The first one has to do with the fact that NASA has now retired the Space Shuttle. And the reason that's important for us is that NASA has committed that from now on they're going to rely on private industry in order to take supplies up to the International Space Station. And because that will be a commercial endeavor, they'll need to have an FAA launch license in order to carry out that mission. So that's an important new responsibility that we'll have in working with our partners at NASA. Right now, there are 2 companies that have contracts with NASA to carry out cargo delivery services, SpaceX and Orbital Sciences. SpaceX has its rocket called the Falcon 9 and a capsule called the Dragon. Orbital Sciences has the Taurus 2 rocket that they're designing and building, and their spacecraft is called the Cygnus. Now, last December, SpaceX conducted its demonstration flight of their system, and on that mission, a Falcon 9 rocket took the Dragon into orbit, circled the Earth twice, did a deorbit burn, and came back under a parachute and landed in the ocean off the coast of California. That was a very significant milestone because it was the first time that a private company had ever achieved that kind of accomplishment. It was also a big day for our office because that mission represented the first time we had ever issued a re-entry license. So a big deal for us as well. NASA is also working with a number of different companies on designs to carry people up to the space station. They have Space Act agreements with 4 different companies, including SpaceX, Boeing, Sierra Nevada, and Blue Origin, and unfunded Space Act agreements with 3 other companies, ATK and Excalibur Almaz and United Launch Alliance. And depending on the funding that NASA is able to provide to those companies, we could see commercial operations carrying people to the space station within the next 3 to 4 years. The second big challenge that we're facing is related to a brand new segment of the industry, and that's suborbital space tourism. Our office is dealing with about a half a dozen different companies right now, each of which is trying to design, build, and test systems that can take people up to the edge of space, where you can look out the window and see the black sky and the curvature of the Earth and experience the magic of weightlessness. Now, we know not all of those companies is going to be successful. Some will run into technical difficulties. Some will run out of money. But there's enough good people working on this effort and enough funds being invested that I'm confident that within just the next few years, we're going to see multiple companies operating several times per week on suborbital missions. Now think about what that will mean. Instead of 4 or 5 space shuttle flights per year, you're going to see hundreds of launches every year with thousands of people getting the opportunity to personally experience spaceflight. I think that's really going to change how we think about space. Just as one example, there's Virgin Galactic, led by Richard Branson. He signed an agreement with Scaled Composites to build a new, larger, and improved system based on the system that won the X Prize. And they're planning to operate a fleet of 5 spaceships, each of which will carry a crew of 2 and 6 passengers. And they're talking about an initial ticket price of $200,000, so it's pretty pricey, but I expect that the price is going to come down once they start operating. They already have more than 300 people who have signed up and put down deposits with over $40 million sitting in the bank, and they're not even ready to fly yet. So that shows the kind of interest that we're seeing so far. And these are not just concepts now. We've got real vehicles flying. The White Knight 2, which is the air carrier aircraft, is shown in the upper left there. Very unusual configuration, and it's really the largest all-composite aircraft ever built. Now, that space between the twin fuselages is where you'd hang the spaceship, which is shown in the lower right on the picture there. That's called Spaceship 2. And those vehicles are flying right now. The spaceship has had 16 glide flights so far, and I expect to see the first rocket-powered testing within the next year. Once they're done with the testing, they'll set up shop in New Mexico at a place called Spaceport America. This is the artist's concept of how it will look, and they've already done quite a bit of work out there too. In fact, the runway is now complete. And just last month, we saw the dedication of the terminal hangar facility. It's really a beautiful place and should be all set to go by the time Virgin Galactic is ready to begin their commercial operations. And when you talk about space tourism, one of the first questions that comes up is there really a market for that? After all, how many adventuresome millionaires can there really be out there? But it turns out there's quite a few people who would love to buy a ticket. Recently, Futron did a survey, and they didn't just walk down the street asking people who wanted to go into space. They did a careful study of who would have the kind of savings or disposable income that would allow them to pay these kinds of hefty prices, and which of those people would be interested in going for a ride. And it turned out, based on the study that they did, that they're projecting that within the next 10 years, space tourism could be $1 billion per year industry. Much of that will be for suborbital flights, but orbital flights are not far behind. Now, some of the entrepreneurs out there today are not building rockets, they're building destinations. Robert Bigelow, who made his fortune in the hotel business, has been working with NASA on inflatable habitats. And they've advanced this technology, and they're planning to build basically commercial space stations. He's got a huge factory in operation outside Las Vegas, and at this point, he's basically waiting for the transportation, somebody to build those safe and reliable and cost-effective rockets to take people back and forth. And once those are available, he's ready to launch his habitats into space as some place to go to. So that could happen as early as 2015 or so. In addition to transportation to orbit, we're also seeing commercial firms look at other destinations. The X Prize Foundation has partnered with Google to have a new prize competition. This one is called the Google Lunar X Prize. And in this competition, the idea is to try and land a rover on the surface of the moon, have it translate at least 500 meters, and send back video, pictures, and other data to the Earth. And if you can do that by December 31st of 2015, there's up to $30 million in prizes waiting for you. Now, already 26 teams have raised their hand to say they're interested in competing. We'll see if any of those are able to accomplish the task. But how about sending people back to the moon? Could you do that commercially? Well, some people think so. Space Adventures, which is the company that has brokered tickets on Russian rockets to fly to the International Space Station for 7 different people, has been talking to the Russians about modifying one of their Soyuz craft with an upper stage so that it could fly around the moon, not to land, but just to have a flyby, if you will, and back to Earth. And they're estimating that the ticket price for that mission would cost $100 million. Apparently, they've already sold 1 ticket. If they can sell 1 more ticket, they say that within 3 years, they'll be ready to launch that mission. So that'll be interesting to follow and see if they're able to achieve that. So that's a quick look at some of the things that are happening today in the commercial space transportation arena. With the retirement of the shuttle, in the next 1 to 2 years, we're going to be seeing some very exciting things, including the first commercial cargo deliveries to the International Space Station and the beginning of space tourism. Now, Congress has charged our office with doing our best to encourage, facilitate, and promote these new activities in a way that's continuously improving their safety. And our office is committed to doing our part to enable industry's progress. Now, we're going to wait a few minutes before we take questions, but before we do that, I just have one question for you. Are you ready to go? Thank you very much.